Welcome to On the Moneyline, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm Newsome, and I'm here to break down UFC Vegas 96. 2 weeks after my vacation, I'm back, and I'm ready to jump back into the breakdowns. And it is a couple of days later than normal. We do, of course, normally try to get everything out on a Monday, but with this event hosting the Ultimate Fighter finale fights, I didn't want to reveal any spoilers and ruin everybody's viewing experience of it. It did air last night. The last episode of Tough 32 aired last night, so I'm not counting this podcast as a spoiler now because it's out in the public. However, if you haven't watched that episode and you do want to watch it without knowing what's happened, then of course, do not listen to this podcast until you've watched that last episode. That's the only warning I'm going to give you because it is out into the public. Now, as for this card itself, there's been a lot of chopping and changing. I'm a little underwhelmed by this card, if I'm being honest. And for the first time in maybe about 10 plus years, it was looking like it was going to be the first UFC event that I actually haven't had a single bet on from an official bets perspective. But as things have chopped and changed and the lines have moved, things might start changing. I might have one or two bets in the end. But yeah, as of a couple of days ago, it was looking really bleak to the point of I was just going to hold my hands up and say, I can't find anything from a value perspective, and I was just going to pass and move on to the next event. But like I say, there has been some changes, and there's also another fight that's been added. So I'm interested to see those betting lines as well. But yeah, from a card perspective, from the actual fights, I actually think there's going to be some good fights. But from a betting perspective, like I say, I was a little underwhelmed. Hopefully things will change and I'll have a couple of bets on the card. Now, just before we get into the breakdowns, as always, if you are wanting to jump into the action this weekend, you can do so at MMAplay365.com. Even if there was no official bets, there's still going to be fun parlays to play. There's still going to be the AI from Base AI, our UFC prediction software. So from a subscription and a package perspective, there's still absolutely going to be betting content there. There just wouldn't be any official bets. But like I say, I'm hoping things are changing and there will be one or two by the time it comes to fight night. But like I say, everything is under one subscription, whether that is Base AI, our UFC prediction software, or whether you want the Handicapper betting advice with fun parlays, written breakdowns, all that good stuff, then everything is in one subscription. All you have to do is choose one event monthly or annually, and you'll be away and you'll have all your betting content for the events that you choose. And that is all at MMAplay365.com. And that's it. With the introduction out the way, with the promo out the way, we're going to jump straight into the breakdowns. And as always, we're going to start with the main event in the middleweight division. We've got a 5-round fight between Gerald Cannonier versus Caio Borralho. And this is a really good fight. And again, I'm really happy it's over 5 rounds. I think it definitely just does this fight justice. I think the 5 rounds, the extra couple of rounds, might jump into the favour of Gerald Cannonier a little bit. But again, it's difficult to say that until we see Caio Borralho fight over 5 rounds. He doesn't look like he's got any major cardio issues over 3 rounds, so you can't really assume that going into round 4 and round 5 that he's going to have cardio problems. But Gerald Cannonier has definitely got the experience edge in regards to 5-round fights. He's fought a better quality, better level of competition in regards to opponents than Caio Borralho. But like I say, Caio Borralho, he's got to have that step up at some point, and this is it. And I really like Caio Borralho as a fighter. Striking's decent. He's got good power. Wrestling, I think, could potentially be a little bit better if you're looking at, any flaws within his style. But the only reason why I'm really critical of the wrestling is because his grappling's so good, and I want to see him get fights down to the mat with more urgency, because he does tend to trust his striking a little bit more than what he probably should. Not because his striking's bad, but because his jiu-jitsu is so good. And of course, he's fighting out of the Fighting Nerds gym in Brazil, which I keep saying, it seems week in, week out, this gym is absolutely on a heater in 2024. Fighters just don't seem to be losing. I mean, the latest examples, you look at Gian Silva, he had a massive step up in competition against Charles Jourdain, absolutely smoked him. Then he has another step up in competition just a couple of weeks later against Drew Dober. He beats Drew Dober, finishes him as well via a TKO, doctor stoppage. And then you look at Bruna Brazil. She wasn't really looking too great, but then bang, she fights Molly McCann, beats Molly McCann. The Jim is absolutely on a heater. Like I say, everybody that's fighting out there is coming looking good, prepared, strong, on form. There seems to be a real good vibe around that gym as well, which again, the more fighters that keep winning out of a relatively, I wouldn't say small, but small to medium gym like that, the more fighters that keep coming back with wins, the better the morale is. And like I say, it's really good for the mental. So with Caio Borralho, he's the guy that, I don't know if he started fighting nerds, but he's definitely the one, in my opinion, that put it on the map, because I'd never heard of that gym before Caio Borralho. And Caio Borralho, remember, he used to train at Extreme Couture as well, so he went back home to this gym. So like I say, for me, he was the one that put it on the map. Now, I am digressing a little bit, back to the fight itself. Stylistically, I think that Jared Cannonier is going to be the better striker here, or at least throw more volume. He does seem to have, pulled back from this crazy explosive power that he was knocking guys out with, and now he seems to be putting a more methodical approach to his fights, which, to be honest with you, tends to happen when fighters are aging. And you can't forget that Jared Cannonier is 40 years old. But even at 40 years old, I think this is the best that Cannonier has ever looked. I think he's in his prime at 40 years old, which is crazy to say. But it is, like I've already mentioned, very common for fighters when they start aging and they've had that knockout power, that just to tone the knockout power down a little bit and start to put volume. The one that I always use an example is Junior Dos Santos. I know he was a heavyweight, so that's a little bit different, but he always had that knockout power. But later in his career, he turned very technical, point scoring type of style, and had success later in his career because of that. And I think Jared Cannonier is doing that as well. So Caio Borralho, for me, he's got to keep active in this fight, because if he's not, he is going to run the risk of Jared Cannonier potentially just slowly running away with the fight from a volume perspective. But remember, this is mixed martial arts. It's not just a striking fight. There's going to be wrestling, there's going to be grappling, and this is where I really like Caio Borralho, because I do think that Cannonier's got decent takedown defense, and I do think he's got a good get-up game once he is taken down. But Caio Borralho has a different level of and a different style of holding fighters down, a different level and style of control on the mat. Like, you look at his UFC debut, he comes in there, he's getting these half takedowns, but then he's sinking a hook in against the cage, and then suddenly it becomes really difficult to get him off, and you start trying to take some chances, trying to stand back up, and then he'll find your back. And once Caio Borralho's on somebody's back, it's almost impossible to get him off. And that, for me, is where he's one of these dominant backpackers, and I kind of feel that he might go to this against Cannonier, because Cannonier does have power, he does have volume, and he's got experience, and this is a big opportunity for Caio Borralho. A main event, 5 rounds, he's not going to want to let this slip away from him. So I do think that he's going to be competitive striking. I don't think he's going to shy away from that. I think he's a good enough striker to hang with Jared Cannonier. It's just, if this is a 25-minute kickboxing fight, I'm not sure Caio Borralho wins. But when the wrestling starts kicking in, even the half takedowns, they don't need to be fully completed takedowns, or finding an entry, shooting in, getting the fight to the cage, and then sinking that one hook in and just controlling the fight from there, just draining Jared Cannonier. I don't think Jared Cannonier will gas. He does seem to have a phenomenal gas tank, so I've got no question marks about him tiring or anything like that, but just methodically breaking him a little bit, just slowing the fight down, having moments on the mat, grappling. And of course, when the fight is on the mat, Caio Borralho is levels above Jared Cannonier when it comes to jiu-jitsu, so there's an opportunity, or there could be opportunities and a possibility of Caio Borralho finishing the fight on the mat as well. So I do think it's going to be a highly competitive fight. I do think that Cannonier is going to be better from a striking and volume perspective. But like I said, when mixed martial arts kicks into this fight and the wrestling and the grappling plays into it, I just think Caio Borralho is going to have the smart game plan here. I think he's going to be able to get that control time in the clinch against the cage on the mat, and just be able to win the minutes in the rounds, which I think could be quite important. And then, like you say, you add in the fact that he's from the Fighting Nerds gym, and these guys just are on an absolute flyer at the minute and just running through everybody. These big step-ups in competitions is no problem for these guys. They keep winning and winning and winning. I think this is another one of those cases where Caio Borralho, he's stepping up in competition, and rightly so, and I think he's going to thrive in it. So for those reasons, I'm picking Caio Borralho to win this fight. And in the next fight, the co-main event, we've got Angela Hill versus Tabatha Ricci. Now, again, talking about competitive fights, I think this is going to be another really competitive fight. And again, talking about an aging fighter, Angela Hill, I believe, is 39 years old, which is so old for this, division and where she's at in this sport. I'm not saying it's so old as an age. I'm not far off 39 myself, but for where she's at as a professional athlete at the highest level in the UFC in this weight class, it is an old age. But again, just like I've just mentioned with Jared Cannonier, Angela Hill is probably looking career best right now. She's not on a decline, or at least it doesn't look that way. She's still got a ton of fight in her. She's still got good cardio. She's still got a good skill set. She's probably rounding out a game a little bit better as well, a little bit more than what she has done in previous fights in regards to getting the wrestling and grappling in there. She won by submission last time out against somebody who is a legit grappler. So yeah, like I say, even though she's 39, I still think it's going to be competitive. But I think that Ricci is also making developments in a game as well. But from the flip side, so Ricci was always a fighter that relied on the takedowns and then the grappling. And she is a good wrestler when she puts it all together. And then her topside grappling, she's got decent control as well. She's really, really fluent within being consistent on a positioning within her grappling. And that's always where she's been strongest. But recently she's been developing her striking. And you can see that if you watch her fights in chronological order. She trusts her striking a little bit more each fight. She's getting better with her striking each fight. She's becoming more competitive with her striking each fight as well. However, I think in this fight, I would have a concern for Ricci if she has fell in love with her striking and she doesn't go back to her wrestling and grappling here, because I do think that she is going to need to wrestle and grapple to beat Angela Hill. And if she doesn't, and this is a 15-minute kickboxing fight, then yeah, I think Hill's going to win the fight. It's just like I mentioned with the main event in the last fight breakdown, this isn't a striking fight. It's not a kickboxing fight. It's mixed martial arts. And at some point, mixed martial arts, I believe, will kick into this fight. And when it does, I think that's where Ricci is going to start being able to have success and, put a bit of a stamp on the fight. Again, I think that Ricci is going to be able to get takedowns. Maybe it's going to be difficult for the first one or two. Maybe if she really starts becoming relentless with it, she'll be able to get the fight down. She'll be able to get some top control time. And like I say, just start having her own success in this fight. It is another very close fight, another fight that's going to be highly competitive. I think if Ricci does get the takedowns and top side control, then she's going to win the fight. But I think if she doesn't, then Angela Hill's going to win the fight. And it's one of these binary fights, in my opinion, where, look, if it stays striking, then Hill's going to win. And, if we see a good level of wrestling and grappling, or, good moments of wrestling and grappling throughout the entire fight, then Ricci's going to win. So, yeah, it's one of those where, you can't be too shocked if the fight's 1-1 going into round 3, or all the 3 rounds are super close, coin flip rounds, and you've got no real edges of which way you score in the fight. It's just going to be a very close fight, in my opinion. But I do like the fact that Ricci is making the developments in her striking that's allowing her to be competitive with fighters like Angela Hill. Although I don't think she's the better striker, there's a difference between being competitive enough to hang, to get other levels or other aspects of your game going in the fight. And I think that's exactly what we're going to see with Ricci. I think she's probably going to be a little bit short on the feet in regards to the striking skill set differential, but it's going to be enough for her to be able to set up her takedowns, get some takedowns against Hill, get some top control time, and maybe edge a couple of the rounds out via the wrestling and grappling. So for those reasons, I'm picking Tabatha Ricci to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is the first of the Ultimate Fighter finales, and we're in the middleweight finale here. We've got Ryan Loder versus Robert Valentin. And quickly from a betting perspective, this fight opened a pick'em, and now Valentin's sitting at like -160 up to -175 in some places. So a lot of money came in on Valentin, and I do kind of get it. Like, he's a Viking looking dude, and he's massive. He's physically built. He looks absolutely huge for a middleweight, and he's got that explosive striking, absolutely brutal elbow KO on the Ultimate Fighter itself. Then he got this weird submission that I don't think I've actually ever seen before. It was called as an armbar, but in my opinion, it was definitely more of an Americana, but you can't really call it an inverted Americana because it was actually completed with the legs not in a different position. So maybe you can call it an inverted Americana. I'm not sure. It's going to be really interesting to see what places like Topology and Sherdog list that submission as, although they'll probably just follow the referee's call of an armbar. But yeah, it was a real good submission that, like I say, I don't think I've ever seen before. I can't recall it if I have. But yeah, so this guy, Robert Valentin, he's got power, he's explosive, he's got a good submission game as well. You can see that. He looks like he's going to be a very difficult fighter to fight. Now, Ryan Loder on the other side, he's a wrestling coach, I believe, at Team Alpha Male in Sacramento with Uriah Faber. He's a former D1 wrestler, NCAA D1 wrestler. I also believe he got a bronze medal in the IBJJF World Championships as well in Jiu-Jitsu. So this guy has got a very good wrestling and grappling background, and watching him in The Ultimate Fighter, he doesn't look like he's got a bad gas tank either. You see other fighters, I'll use Andrei Petrosky as a good example. Like Petrosky, when he was in The Ultimate Fighter, he was trying to wrestle and grapple heavily, and then he was tiring out badly. But Loder doesn't seem like he's that type of guy. He seems like he can wrestle for 3 rounds, which might be important here because, look, from striking perspective, Loder can strike as well, but I don't expect him to have too many issues for Robert Valentin. I think Robert Valentin looks like a guy that's probably going to be able to eat Loder's strikes, that's going to be able to exchange back, and in those exchanges, if Loder isn't hurting Valentin, Valentin will just ride a few punches whilst landing some himself, potentially landing that elbow. So from a striking perspective, I think Valentin's going to be more effective and more dangerous. However, I do like the fact that Loder has this wrestling background, and he's a wrestling coach at one of the better gyms in the world in regards to MMA, and he's going to be able to wrestle here. Now, with the physical size and the power and the strength that you can clearly see of Valentin, I think that Loder is going to fail on a few of these early takedowns. It's going to be one of these where he's shooting and Valentin is just like turning the hip into the shot and just defending and throwing Loder off like there's a discrepancy in weight. But I think if Loder does just keep on going at Valentin, I'm just not sure that Valentin's going to be able to defend all of these takedowns for a full 3 rounds. I think if Loder keeps going, he's going to miss on a few. Maybe he gets Valentin down on his 3rd or 4th attempt and Valentin gets straight back up to his feet. But if Loder keeps going, I think the takedowns will come easier. I think the top control time will start to show a little bit more. And I just think from a skill set perspective, this might be the biggest gap in skill. I do think that Loder's wrestling and grappling is going to have to play a huge factor here for Loder to win the fight. But Loder seems to know his game plan. You look at him in The Ultimate Fighter, he wasn't trying to stand and strike with these guys. He was shooting his takedowns and going to where he knows he's best. So I trust Loder from a game plan perspective. And I also have a little bit of concern with not just Valentin, but these strikers that are very big, powerful, and explosive. What happens when the opponents weather the storm? What happens when those explosions start slowing down a little bit and are becoming more telegraphed, and now you've got a fighter that's trying to take you down and now you might be a little bit tired? I think it might be one of these fights. Look, there's every chance that Valentin comes out here and knocks Loder out early in round 1. Super explosive, super powerful, everyone's hyped on him, and he becomes the Ultimate Fighter middleweight champion of Tough 32. But I think if that just doesn't happen, Loder's going to grind himself into this fight and become more and more live the longer the fight goes on. So for those reasons, I am slightly siding with Ryan Loder to win this fight and become the Ultimate Fighter Season 32 middleweight winner. And in the next fight, we're here for the second Ultimate Fighter Season 32 finale. This time we've got the featherweights. We've got Kaan Ofli versus Mairon Santos. Now, Mairon Santos definitely had a very up and down road in regards to, opponents switching. He was supposed to fight Shigmankas Ramaska in the Ultimate Fighter finale, but Ramaska wasn't clear to fight, and then stepped in Guillermo Torres, and he fought Guillermo Torres and won. So, yeah, Kaan Ofli versus Mairon Santos. Again, it's another fight where I feel like we've got a bit of a striker versus a bit of a wrestler and grappler. Mairon Santos looks like a very calm and composed Muay Thai style striker. Still very young, still getting better. He's got hard low kicks. He's got good counter-reactive strikes as well, which again are all traits and characteristics of somebody that does have a good level of quality within Muay Thai. Now, Kaan Ofli, he's got decent striking himself, but the striking seems to be a means to closing the distance, getting takedowns, getting his fighters down to the mat. He reminds me a lot, actually, of Alexander Volkanovski, in this featherweight division, quite short, quite stocky, well-rounded, but does have that wrestling and grappling game at this level in the UFC to be able to nullify opponents. And with Mairon Santos has got decent takedown defense. He doesn't get taken down easily. However, he can be taken down, and we have seen it numerous times in The Ultimate Fighter itself. And if he is taken down, he's got a decent get-up game. He does the right things. He gets his back to the cage. He starts posting up on a hand, starts trying to work back up to his feet using the cage wall. But the two issues that I've got with Mairon Santos in regards to the defensive wrestling and the defensive grappling is that, like I've already mentioned, he can be got at, he can be taken down, and he allows entries into takedowns quite easily as well. So even some of the takedowns that he defends, the entries just look a little bit too easy for his opponents just to, shoot in on that single leg, pick a leg up, and suddenly he's having to defend a takedown. Now, against somebody like Kaan Ofli, if Santos is providing those opportunities for Ofli to find reasonably easy entries into takedowns, then he's going to be an absolute nightmare for Mairon Santos, and he will score a lot of takedowns. And the thing is with Mairon Santos, the other thing that I don't like about the get-up game is the fact that he can wait a little bit too long before actually completing that get-up. So even if he's in a position of he's half up, he's half down, but you can see that he's working, those positions seem to last a little bit longer than what you'd like. And the issue in a 3-round mixed martial arts fight is if you're spending extended amounts of time in those positions, well, you're not scoring points. The clock's running down. The fighter that's shooting the takedown, that's still half holding you down, is going to be looking better in the judge's eyes. So those are the two issues that I've got with Mairon Santos. Now, in regards to the striking, I think Santos is going to be the better striker. I do worry for Kaan Ofli if he stands in front of Santos for too long, because Santos has got brutal low kicks, and it looks like it's only like 2, 3, maybe 4 of them before they start wrecking the leg of his opponent. So Ofli's got to have that in mind. But I actually like Ofli in this fight, and I'm really surprised of how good he looked against Nathan Fletcher as well, which we'll actually talk about a little bit later on. But Nathan Fletcher for me is, again, I don't know all the fighters that took part in The Ultimate Fighter. This is one of the seasons that I actually didn't watch start to finish. But I would imagine that if there was odds pre-Ultimate Fighter, that Nathan Fletcher was probably going to be up there, maybe as one of the favourites to win the entire thing. He's a legit fighter, and Kaan Ofli just made him not look bad, but Kaan Ofli just looked so good against Nathan Fletcher. Really surprising that he looked that good, because Fletcher is very good himself. So I do think that Ofli is going to be able to, not win a striking battle against Santos, but I think he's going to be able to hold his own. I think he's going to be competitive. But once the takedowns start coming, Ofli looks like he'll be able to do this for 3 rounds. I think that he's going to have success wrestling. He's going to have some success grappling. And I think although Santos' striking is better, I think the longer the fight goes on, maybe Santos becomes a little bit hesitant because of the relentlessness of the wrestling and grappling from Ofli. And it just becomes one of those fights that just starts to slip away from Santos. So for those reasons, I'm picking Kaan Ofli to win this fight and become the Ultimate Fighter Season 32 featherweight winner. And in the next fight, we're back to the UFC roster. We've got Michael Morales versus Neil Magny. Big step up for Michael Morales in regards to, a step up in competition. The level that Neil Magny is at and has been for years, and Neil Magny's fought the best of the best in the division over the years, but it's a good step up for Morales. It's the right step up for Morales, and I think it's one that is going to absolutely shine in. Neil Magny, he's got this type of style where when one fighter is surging, when a young, hungry, up-and-coming fighter is surging, he faces the Neil Magny test, and Neil Magny, if you pass him, then yeah, you're on your way to doing great things. And if you don't, then you need a bit of a reset and, a bit of a going back to the drawing board and getting back at things and start to make your way back up to that position again. Neil Magny, though, he's one of these fighters where he's just a real grinding, sort of clock-draining fighter where he will make fighters fight his own fight. And it's really weird. Arlovski always had that aura about him as well. Arlovski would fight stupidly fast and powerful heavyweight, but suddenly you fight Arlovski and everything's slow and you're fighting at his pace, and I just don't know how they do it. And Neil Magny's got that type of aura about him where in the cage, no matter who's in front of him, he just turns the fight into his own style, starts clinching and dragging the clock down, and everything becomes a little bit ugly, and then suddenly there's takedowns for a couple of seconds, and then the opponent's back up, and all while Neil Magny's just winning the minutes of the rounds. But I think Michael Morales is going to be a bit different here, because Morales isn't bad in the clinch himself. He's got nasty elbows, he's got good knees, and I think Magny closing the distance here is going to be exactly what Michael Morales wants, because as soon as Magny enters that striking range with Morales is going to be firing hard punches, kicks, he's powerful, he's got a good gas tank as well, and I just think that even Morales might be able to get a couple of takedowns here. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, I'm not saying he's going to win by wrestling and grappling, but just being able to mix things up with Magny. I think Magny's got a real bad stylistic fight here against Morales because of the explosivity, because of the power that Morales possesses, and the one style that Neil Magny has always struggled against is that explosive, powerful style. And I'll go back to the Ponzinibbio fight. Ponzinibbio absolutely was a wrecking ball against Neil Magny because he had that forward pressure, tough, in-your-face, powerful, explosive style at that time. And I think Michael Morales has got that similar style. So I don't think it's a good matchup for Neil Magny. I think this is a great fight for Michael Morales to come into the fight, beat Magny, propel himself up towards the better level of opponents in the rankings, and we'll see where Morales goes from there. But for this fight specifically, I'm picking Michael Morales to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is going to be a fun fight, I think, if it gets extended, which again is a big question, but it's a very binary fight. We've got Edmen Shahbazyan versus Gerald Meerschaert, and like I said, it's binary to the absolute T. You've got Shahbazyan, who's going to knock Meerschaert's head clean off if there is huge extended periods of time striking. But if Gerald Meerschaert can weather a storm here and his head doesn't get knocked off, then he is going to drag Shahbazyan into deep waters where Shahbazyan just will not want to swim in. And yeah, it's one of them where you can argue both sides. For me, I think that the solid argument for Shahbazyan is that he's going to win round one by knockout. Meerschaert will get knocked out. But like I say, there's the other side of the argument where if that knockout doesn't happen in round one, we've seen Shahbazyan tire in previous fights. We've seen him have issues with wrestlers and grapplers that are a level above him, and then he starts to struggle getting back up to his feet. And Meerschaert's just an absolute king of being able, at this level in the UFC, of being able to weather storms and drag fighters deep into, like I say, the later rounds, into deep waters, and just slowly take over fights and just make it a horrible experience for them. And we've seen it a million times from both guys. We've seen Shahbazyan score these big knockouts in early in fights in round one, and we've seen Meerschaert drown fighters, down the stretch. So it's just which side you fancy. And to me, I can absolutely make a case for both of these guys in regards to the paths to victory, and it would not shock me at all if Edmen Shahbazyan didn't get a first round knockout and Meerschaert got takedowns, got on top of him, drained the gas tank, and either finished him late or wins a comfortable decision after 3 rounds. I can absolutely see that, but I do think when it comes to how likely the probabilities are for each of the paths to victory, I just think Shahbazyan's is a little bit greater. I think that obviously all fights start standing with striking, and that itself is going to be a problem for Meerschaert because Shahbazyan does start well. He does have decent wrestling himself, especially when he's fresh early in rounds. I think if he can stay away from closing the distance too much with Meerschaert, battering from the outside a little bit, and then coming with some big power with the boxing, that he's going to be able to get Meerschaert out early. So, like I say, not going to be shocked with a Meerschaert win at all for the reasons I've discussed, but I do think the probability of Shahbazyan getting the early knockout is slightly greater than the probability of Meerschaert being able to weather that storm and then take things down the stretch. So for those reasons, I'm picking Edmen Shahbazyan to win this fight. And in the next fight, this fight was only added, I think, yesterday or the day before. We've got Denis Buzukja versus Francis Marshall. Now, it's supposed to have been Buzukja versus Danny Silva. Danny Silva's pulled out. And I think that Buzukja's got an equally tough opponent in front of him. Like, if I'm being honest, I do think that Danny Silva's probably a harder matchup for Denis Buzukja, but I think that Francis Marshall's going to pose his own problems for Buzukja as well. Now, with Buzukja, he's a fighter that I've not been massively high on since he's come to the UFC. He had a bit of hype pre-UFC, but I don't know whether that's because he's training with Serra-Longo and Aljamain Sterling and Merab Dvalishvili, and they're in his corner, and you sort of get that impression that, look, if you're training with these guys, then you must be in and around that level. And I just don't think Buzukja definitely isn't around that Sterling and Merab Dvalishvili level, and again, that's not a hit on Buzukja, because those two are the best fighters in the world. But I just don't think that Buzukja has hit the hype that was there with him before he came to the UFC. Now, in regards to his skill set, he's decent everywhere. I do actually think he's a UFC caliber fighter. Like, he'll win fights in the UFC. But I just think when he has these step-ups in competition, like a Danny Silva or like a Francis Marshall, and they're not even that step-up in competition from a ranking perspective, it's a step-up in regards to a skill set is what I'm talking about, because I think that Danny Silva does have a better skill set than Buzukja. I think that Francis Marshall has a better skill set than Buzukja, but I just don't think Buzukja is going to be able to level up to beat these guys. So I'm not sure. Like I say, he'll win fights. He's a UFC caliber fighter, but I just don't think he excels in one specific area. He's just good everywhere, both offensively and defensively as well. Like, his striking's okay, his wrestling's okay, his grappling's okay. But once he starts fighting fighters that have got a better skill set in one or more of those areas, then he's going to really struggle to beat them. And I think Francis Marshall is exactly that. From a striking perspective, I think this is where Buzukja's path to victory is, because every fighter does have a path to victory, or at least most fighters do in most fights. I think Buzukja landing a hard shot on Francis Marshall, knocking him down and knocking him out, I think that's the way Buzukja wins this fight. But I'm not sure how likely a knockout happens for Buzukja if these guys fight 10 times straight. So I'm just not sure how likely that path to victory is to hit, because look, Francis Marshall's got decent striking himself. Like, I do think Buzukja might have maybe the more power, but when it comes to a technical aspect and a technical striking fight, I think they're very, very similar. Where Francis Marshall will end up being better, though, in my opinion, is the wrestling and grappling. It looks like he's been doing work at American Top Team as well, so although this is a short notice fight for Marshall, he's actually up a weight class, so he's not having that brutal weight cut. And like I said, it looks like he's been getting in good work with the likes of like Grant Dawson at American Top Team. So I think he's going to be prepared here. I think he'll be definitely prepared from a wrestling and grappling perspective. And that's where I see the fight playing out. I think Marshall will be okay on the feet. I think if it's a 15-minute striking fight, it's close, competitive, could be a split decision. But again, as I've mentioned a couple of times already in this podcast, it's mixed martial arts. And I do think Marshall will mix in the wrestling and grappling. And that's what's going to set him apart. So for those reasons, I'm picking Francis Marshall to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is one that I've been flipping back and forth on, if I'm being honest. We've got Viacheslav Borshchev versus James Llontop. And the reason why I've been flipping back and forth is because, like, James Llontop seems to be the more well-rounded fighter here. He's absolutely predominantly a striker, by the way, but I just think that, you know, although he's predominantly a striker, I've seen him do some work with the likes of Diego Lopez at Grasso's gym, and I just don't know whether he's got wrestling and grappling as a sneaky trait in his back pocket that he hasn't yet used. Like, I get that vibe from him, but even from a striking perspective, he's a very calm, composed striker. He's got decent volume, he's got good power. And the thing is with Viacheslav Borshchev's absolutely a striker as well. And again, he's got, you know, a ton of kickboxing experience, and he's dangerous. He's got power also. So I think at the very least from both of these fighters, they are going to get the fight that they want, because I think Borshchev's probably sick of fighting wrestlers and grapplers because he's just getting taken down, and then the fights are slipping away from him. James Llontop, last time out, he got taken down 3 times, defended the first 2 takedowns quite well. The third time got his back taken and got choked out. So I think both fighters are going to enjoy this fight because they're going to get the striking battle that they want. However, like I say, I don't know what it is. It's like a weird gut feeling that I've got, that I just don't know whether Llontop's going to have some wrestling and grappling in his back pocket, because it doesn't even need, and I don't mean to say this disrespectfully, but it doesn't even need to be like high-level UFC wrestling and grappling, because Borshchev can be taken down relatively easily and he can be controlled. Now, the one thing I will say with Borshchev is he has looked a little better in regards to his defensive grappling the longer he has been in the UFC. Like, he doesn't just settle on his back and allow his opponents to roll all over him. He is looking for opportunities and positions to get back up to his feet. So I do think Borshchev has developed a little bit there, but even from a striking perspective, I think Borshchev might be the better striker here technically. But the worry that I've got with Borshchev is his chin. Like, he got blasted by Chase Hooper, who is absolutely not known for his striking. He got blasted by Sadikov as well, who was an all-rounder. You know, he's got decent striking and decent power. But he's been hurt multiple times in his last 2 fights in the UFC. Hurt badly as well. And to the point where he's having to rely on his toughness and his recoverability to keep him in fights, which is never something you want to rely on. But he's also been hurt pre-UFC as well, so I don't know whether there's a durability issue there with Borshchev, which again leads me towards James Llontop here, because Llontop, although he might not be the better technical striker, he's got power and he's going to land on Borshchev. And Llontop's definitely a better striker than a Chase Hooper, who almost knocked Borshchev out. So yeah, it's one that I've been flipping because, like I say, you've got the better technical striker in my opinion, but that better technical striker has potentially got durability issues, whereas the other side, you've still got a good technical striker that still has power, may not be as technical, but has got the knockout edge. So yeah, it's like I say, I've been flipping between the two, but I do have big concerns about the durability of Borshchev. So for those reasons, I am going to be siding with James Llontop to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got a bit of a strange one, actually, which I'll explain. We've got Jose Medina versus Zach Reese. Now, it's a bit of a strange one because the UFC have signed Medina off a loss, which very rarely happens. And I can't remember the last time that the UFC signed somebody off a loss. But not only that, it was a loss on the Contender Series where he was out-volumed like 80 to 40 strikes or something like that. He was taken down 6 times. He didn't look that great, and yeah, it's a bit of a strange one. I just don't know what he's going to bring to the table here against Zach Reese. Zach Reese is going to be 4 inches taller, big reach advantage as well. I mean, Medina's not short, but I mean, Reese is going to have some physical advantages here. I think that Reese has got good explosivity, good power. The one thing that I will say with Medina is he does look to be tough and durable and, you know, enjoys a scrap, which I think is exactly what Zach Reese is going to give him. But I don't think that Medina's going to have too much to offer in regards to nullifying that explosivity and the dangerous striking by taking Reese down. And I think if he does take Reese down, Reese has got decent grappling and he's got submissions off his back. So yeah, it's a tough one to see where Medina actually wins this fight. And like I say, it's a bit of a strange signing in general, the fact that he's coming off a loss, and it's not as if like he's coming off a loss where it was an absolute war and it was back and forth and it was a bloody mess and both fighters landed 100 plus strikes and the UFC thought, you know what, fuck it, he hasn't won, but man, that was a savage fight, we'll sign him anyway. It wasn't one of those types of fights. So yeah, I think it's a strange signing. I'm just not sure what he does against. I think Zach Reese, look, he's a massive favourite, and he's a massive favourite for a reason. I think he's going to get the job done. I mean, Reese could even get takedowns himself, in my opinion, and do work on top of Medina. But I do think it's going to be a fight that ends relatively early. I think both fighters are going to come in there and want to take the head off their opponents. I just think the length and the reach of Reese, along with how active he is with his explosions and, you know, knees and elbow, I just think he's going to be able to hit Medina. Medina's going to take a little bit of damage, but the damage will become too much and end up getting knocked out. So it's like I say, look, this is MMA and crazier things have happened, and we're constantly being surprised by certain fighters, and the UFC have clearly seen something in Jose Medina to sign him that maybe the public have, or at least I haven't seen, and we might see that on the night. But just look, from what I'm seeing from tape, I think Zach Reese is going to win this fight by knockout. So for those reasons, I'm picking Zach Reese to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Josiane Nunes versus Jacqueline Cavalcanti. I don't even know if I've pronounced Cavalcanti correct. There's so many different ways to pronounce these Brazilian fighters' names, but that's what we're going with. And from a fight perspective, look, Josiane Nunes is going to be at a massive height and reach disadvantage, but guess what? She always is going to be at a massive height and reach disadvantage, and it's happened before with numerous fighters, Jessica Andrade being one of them. Like, she's always been very short and small for the division, but the power, the explosivity, and how well-rounded she is has got her through fights. And then John Lineker is another example as well. He was always shorter than every single opponent he ever fought, but again, forward pressure, aggression, power, being well-rounded, again, served him well, being the shorter fighter, and that's what you have to do as a shorter fighter. The good news for Josiane Nunes is that's exactly how she fights. She'll walk through punches to close the distance because she knows she has to, but she'll land combinations, she'll land big power. She's got some wrestling and grappling as well, and I actually really enjoy watching Josiane Nunes fights, especially the fights where she's winning the fights, because that's when you know there's going to be exciting stuff happening, because she'll just keep on winging these big powerful bombs, and she's got the cardio to do it for 3 rounds as well. Now, Cavalcanti on the other side. Cavalcanti is going to be the better technical striker in my opinion. She's definitely going to want to keep her distance in this fight, strike from the outside, because she's going to have the height and the reach over Nunes. The other side of things as well is, with this being in the Apex, it's a smaller cage, so again that kind of favours Nunes a little bit as well. But with Cavalcanti, she has been taken down, so I think that could be a potential path to victory for Nunes. But I do think that Nunes has got to remain active for all of this fight, because if she does take the foot off the gas at any point, Cavalcanti is just going to rack up volume here. Technical striking, straight punches, straight kicks, and she's going to make it a nightmare fight for Nunes. I think it's going to be another close and competitive fight. And again, it's not a cop-out saying that. It's just both fighters need to fight at different ranges, and both fighters will have the moments in those ranges which will make it competitive, and it will make it relatively close. I think Cavalcanti will run away with the volume a little bit, but Nunes will have the big power actions. So when the judges are looking at which fighter's trying to knock their opponent out, that's going to be Nunes. So she'll be in the judges' favour from that perspective. And yeah, it's just one of those where, look, if Cavalcanti triples up on strikes, then the bigger action moments from Nunes probably won't matter or count as much as what the volume of Cavalcanti is. So then you're trying to look for other edges in this fight. And like I say, maybe the wrestling and grappling is, or plays a little bit of a factor. Maybe it breaks the flow of Jacqueline Cavalcanti's striking. And, I don't anticipate seeing Nunes spending a ton of time on top of Cavalcanti from a topside control perspective. But if the fight's close, and if the judges are seeing okay volume versus big action strikes, and they're looking for any sort of other edges like the wrestling and the grappling, then maybe Nunes gets the nod. Again, it's another really close fight. I could make an argument for both fighters winning, but for the sake of this fight being very close, being competitive, I'm just going to side with the underdog here in a close competitive fight. So for those reasons, I'm picking Josiane Nunes to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got the debut of Kong Wang versus Victoria Leonardo. And I think this is a nightmare fight for Victoria Leonardo. The betting lines suggest it as well. Kong Wang's a massive favourite in this fight. I think she was like a 10-1 favourite the last time I looked. It might even be greater than that. But Kong Wang is a fighter out of China that has a very good striking background that seems to have just absolutely sponged the wrestling and grappling. And what I mean by sponged is she's been a sponge when someone's started teaching her wrestling and grappling. She's just took it all on board so quickly and become so good so fast that now she's super well rounded. She's got a good striking base, she's got good wrestling, good grappling, and I think that she's going to be a problem for a lot of fighters, especially in the early UFC career before she's making these big step ups in competition. And I think Victoria Leonardo is just the first fighter on the long line of fighters that are probably going to fall short against Kong Wang. Like, I'm not going to say Kong Wang's going to be a future champion or anything yet at this point, because you do need to see a fighter. More often than not, you need to see a fighter against that top level of competition, but definitely against the lower level, the lower rankings in this division in the UFC, I think Kong Wang's going to be a problem. Victoria Leonardo, she's one of these fighters that's got okay striking, but probably does prefer to wrestle and grapple, but I'm just not sure where she's going to be able to best Kong Wang here. Like, is she going to be able to take Kong Wang down? Well, maybe, but is she going to be a better grappler? I'm not quite sure. And I think on the feet, Victoria Leonardo is going to be significantly outgunned by Kong Wang as well. So, yeah, like I say, it's going to be a tough fight, in my opinion, for Victoria Leonardo, and I'm not sure. Again, unless she finishes Kong Wang, she's got to take 2 out of the 3 rounds against her. I just don't think she finishes her, and I just don't think she wins 2 out of 3 rounds. I think the style of Kong Wang and the quality is better. So for those reasons, I'm picking Kong Wang to win this fight. And in the next fight, I believe this fight's happening anyway. I'm breaking it down because I've seen a couple of reports that it's happening to the point where I don't think it can be false, although places like Tapology and Sherdog haven't yet listed this fight. So yeah, I'm pretty sure it's happening, and it makes sense as well for reasons I'll explain. But we've got Nathan Fletcher versus Zygmantas Ramashka. And one of the reasons I'm not doubting the reports is Zygmantas Ramashka never actually lost in The Ultimate Fighter. So yeah, just very quickly, I haven't mentioned that both of these fighters were in The Ultimate Fighter 32 season that has just now concluded. So Ramashka won his one and only fight that he had in The Ultimate Fighter, and it was probably one of the best fights that I've seen in The Ultimate Fighter, apart from the obvious Forrest Griffin, Stephan Bonnar fight. Outside of that, it might be the best fight I've ever watched on The Ultimate Fighter. It was an absolutely insane fight. Dana White was pretty much on his feet throughout most of it, just like holy shit in every 2 minutes. It was one of those fights that was just so good. Ramashka won it, but because the fight was so good, both fighters beat the shit out of each other. Ramashka never actually got cleared to fight in the finale. So for me, and knowing what Dana White's done previously with fighters over the years, both in the UFC, the Ultimate Fighter, and even the Contender Series as well, he absolutely will have given Ramashka his chance to fight in the UFC after a performance like that. And then on the other side, Nathan Fletcher, like I mentioned earlier on, I didn't watch this season of the Ultimate Fighter. It's probably the only one that I haven't watched. And I think that although I don't know all the fighters that were in the Ultimate Fighter, if there was odds pre-Ultimate Fighter, I've got a funny feeling Nathan Fletcher will have been up there as the favourite or one of the favourites to win the entire show. And I don't know whether it was just an off performance against Ofli or if Ofli is genuinely just really good, but I can understand why the UFC would want Fletcher to sign a contract, and then Ramashka deserves it after the fight that he had, and he couldn't fight because the commission pulled him, not because he couldn't fight. So it just makes sense that the UFC have made this fight. So I've got no doubt that the reports are correct, that these two will be stepping into the cage, and it's going to be a really good fight. Like I said, I was very surprised that Nathan Fletcher not lost against Ofli, but lost in the way that he did. Like, Fletcher's a good fighter, and look, you can watch all the tape that you want on Nathan Fletcher, but unless you're actually following a fighter's career and you're watching Cage Warriors, you're not going to fully understand how good Nathan Fletcher is in regards to the level of fighters that he's beaten. Like, you take a Michele Martignoni, for example. So Michele Martignoni ended up being a Cage Warriors champion. Now, that was actually a prelim on Cage Warriors 3 years ago. And again, you watch tape on that fight and you think, okay, that's a good performance against an Italian. Let's go on to the next fight. But you don't realise like how good Martignoni was then and what he went on to be. Brian Boland, legend of Cage Warriors. Nathan Fletcher submitted him. He submitted Martignoni as well, by the way. So submitted Martignoni, submitted Brian Boland, and then he goes against Dominique Wooden. And this is a Cage Warriors title fight. Now, Nathan Fletcher, look, it might have been a little bit too soon for him, but Nathan Fletcher's looking good in this fight and then suddenly just gets hit with a head kick out from hell in round 3, gets knocked out. But then he comes back and he goes on to fight Alessandro Giordano, who just fought as a reserve in the Cage Warriors prize fighter bantamweight tournament. Now, if Giordano was actually in the main tournament, he might have won the entire thing. And Giordano beat Martignoni as well, who is a former champion. So Nathan Fletcher is a very good fighter. He fights out of Next Gen in Liverpool, which is a renowned gym. Paddy Pimblett, for example, Molly McCann, they've got really good grappling there. The Liverpool fighters are always, in Cage Warriors, are always absolute animals as well. So, look, Nathan Fletcher is a very good fighter. I'm very surprised that he lost in the way that he did, but I think he comes back and looks better. Ramashka is a good fighter himself. He's got good power. Look, we saw that fight in the Ultimate Fighter. It was a sick fight. He didn't shy away from anything. He did get dropped and he got back up, but the fact is he did get got at and he got dropped, but he got back up, put it on his opponent. Really, it was, like I say, it was probably, I haven't watched all the Ultimate Fighter, but I'd be surprised if that wasn't the fight of the season. And if it's not, drop something in the comments on YouTube and tell me which fight it is, because I'll need to go back and watch that, because, like I say, the Ramashka fight was an absolutely beast of a fight. But I just think that Although Romashka's game, he's tough, he's durable, he's got power, he seems to be somewhat well-rounded as well. I just think Nathan Fletcher's going to be a more skilled fighter here. I think that Fletcher, I don't think he wants to be hanging around too much striking, but I think he will get takedowns and get the wrestling and grappling going here against Romashka. And I think we're going to see Nathan Fletcher what he's truly about as a fighter. I don't think we saw the best version of him against Ofli, but like I say, I could be discrediting Ofli there. We'll find out on Saturday night, but I think that Nathan Fletcher is a solid fighter. He's fought solid competition. He's fought for a Cage Warriors championship. He's beaten fighters that are at a high level in Cage Warriors and probably could be in the UFC and be at that level as well. So for those reasons, I'm picking Nathan Fletcher to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of the podcast. It's good to be back. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening as always. Remember, if you're listening to the podcast on one of our streaming platforms like Apple Music, Spotify, Amazon Music, then make sure you come over to YouTube, drop a comment, tell me who you're betting on. You know, it's a tough card from a betting perspective, so I'm really interested to see who you guys are leaning and why you're leaning these fighters, because for some of these fights, I'm just having difficulty not picking the winner, but you know, trying to find value within that winner as well. So yeah, like I say, drop some comments. I might have 1 or 2 bets by the time that the event is starting anyway. But yeah, let's have that conversation. It's always me that gets back to you guys on YouTube as well. I do have a very busy week every week with the other roles that I've got within MMA, but I do try and always make time to reply. So thank you for tuning in. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel if you're on YouTube as well. And one last time, if you're wanting to jump into the action this weekend, then make sure you do so at MMAplay365.com. We've got absolutely everything on there for every type of gambler, whether you're a long-term gambler, whether you're a fun gambler and just want the fun parlays, whether you're just wanting to follow my bets. Then we've also got Bayes AI on there as well from our UFC prediction software, which gives a percentage prediction for every possible outcome of every UFC fight, all in one subscription. Just choose your length, whether that's next event, monthly or annual. That's all at MMAplay365.com. Thank you for listening. I'm Newsome. I'll see you again next week.